Money can buy almost everything except lost time, and the forgiveness never asked for. He was a man of success, expensive suits, fast cars, dinners in glass towers. But inside, he was hollow, as if something, or someone, had been missing for decades. On that rainy afternoon, he decided to visit a nursing home, not out of compassion, but for image, a generous donation to show the world that the rich have hearts too. The smell of mold, medicine, and abandonment hit him like a punch. The tired eyes of elderly residents stared in silence, a silence that seemed to hide secrets. That's when he saw her, sitting on a wooden bench, tangled white hair, eyes staring into nothing. There was something strange about that woman, something familiar. The caretaker whispered, "She doesn't speak. No one visits her. She arrived years ago with no papers, no past." His heart started to pound, that scar on her chin, the way she moved her hands, that melody. Yes, that melody she was humming. It was the same song his mother used to sing when he was a child. But that was impossible. His mother had disappeared 40 years ago. No news, no goodbye. The police assumed the worst, and he simply moved on. But now, right there in front of him, she was alive. Tears started to fall before he could speak. And when he whispered her name, "Mom," she blinked, and for the first time in years, she smiled. A broken smile. A smile full of pain, but a smile. The past came back like an avalanche. The fight, the abandonment, the shame, and then the silence. 4 decades of silence. She had never been dead, just forgotten, ignored, thrown aside by a world that values money more than love. He tried to take her with him. He wanted to care, to make up for the lost years, to rebuild, but it was too late. She passed away that same night. Peacefully, they said. But him, he was never the same again. Now, every year he returns to that nursing home, alone, in silence, and leaves flowers on a wooden bench. Flowers for a woman who forgave him, even after he had forgotten her. He couldn't sleep that night. Not in the luxury of his penthouse, not in the softness of his Egyptian cotton sheets. He kept seeing her face, that smile. It wasn't just a smile of recognition, it was forgiveness. And that haunted him more than any ghost ever could. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, then another, trying to drown the voices in his mind, but it was useless. Memories came back with the force of a crashing wave. He remembered the screaming, the way he had slammed the door. He was only 16, young, angry, humiliated by poverty. He had blamed her for everything, for the leaking ceiling, for the empty fridge, for the father that never came back. He shouted things that no child should ever say to a mother. And when he left, he promised himself he'd never return. Never look back. And he didn't. For years, he believed she had simply run away from the shame, that she abandoned the wreckage they both lived in. He used that belief as fuel. It pushed him to build his empire brick by brick with fire in his gut and ice in his heart. And yet the foundation of that empire was built on her absence, on a lie he never questioned. Now, he knew the truth. She hadn't abandoned him. She had disappeared, vanished into a system that swallowed the forgotten. Maybe she lost herself. Maybe she looked for him. Maybe she waited. The thought drove a knife through his chest. How many nights had she stared at the door, waiting for it to open? How many birthdays had she sat alone, humming that same melody, imagining his face? The guilt settled deep into his bones, heavier than any wealth he had accumulated. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He had everything, except the one thing that ever truly mattered. And still, the world moved on. His business kept growing. Stockholders called. Emails flooded in. Magazines still featured his face as the man who built an empire from nothing. But now every smile felt like a betrayal. Every congratulation was an echo of failure. He stopped attending galas. He canceled meetings. He wandered the halls of his mansion like a ghost, avoiding mirrors, avoiding memories. His assistant tried to bring him back, to revive the brand, the image, the mask. But the mask had shattered. One morning he returned to the nursing home not with flowers but with questions. He begged the staff to show him her records. Her file was thin, a name, not even real, no address, found wandering on the outskirts of the city, disoriented. No one claimed her. No one looked. The system processed her like a number, gave her a room and forgot her. For 35 years she lived in silence. And yet, she never forgot that song. Never forgot his name. The staff told him she used to whisper it sometimes in her sleep. Mateo. That was the moment he broke. In the hallway, he fell to his knees and wept like a child. The nurses tried to comfort him. But how do you comfort a man who realizes he let his mother die alone? The story never made the news. He made sure of it. This wasn't for headlines. This was for her. In her honor he built a foundation, not in his name but in hers. Fundación Alma Silenciosa, Silent Soul Foundation, dedicated to finding the forgotten, giving names to the nameless and bringing light into the darkest corners of society. But no matter how many lives he saved, one life would always remain beyond his reach. One silence would never be broken. One smile and would always be his punishment. He started visiting other nursing homes, not just the one where she had died, but dozens, then hundreds. He would arrive Samavizar, dressed in dark coats and sunglasses, moving silently through halls that smelled of bleach and regret. And always, he searched. For faces like hers, for lost eyes, for signs of someone else abandoned by the noise of the world. Each place felt like a tomb. Some greeted him with trembling smiles, unaware of who he was. Others simply stared. In every chair, in every corner, he saw her ghost. At night, he began dreaming of her. Not as the fragile woman he bet on that bench, but as she once was. Young, strong, full of warmth. In those dreams, she would cook. She would hum that song, and she would ask him with a softness that shattered his core, "Why did you take so long?" He'd wake up gasping. No amount of wealth could ease that ache. He stopped talking to friends, not that he had many left. He disconnected from the life he had built. He hired researchers to investigate the missing elderly across the country. What he found broke him even further. Thousands, tens of thousands, lost names, forgotten souls. Men and women like his mother, erased by time, poverty, illness, or by the selfishness of children too proud or too hurt to look back. It was a plague of silence. And now he knew. He was one of its carriers. His name still held power, but now it wasn't used for deals or profit. He used it to break barriers, open files, pressure politicians. Still, every victory felt like a failure in disguise. Because every time he found someone else's mother, he remembered that he hadn't saved his. The foundation grew. A network of volunteers, therapists, caregivers. Silent Soul became a movement. People wrote letters. Survivors shared stories. Reunions happened. Mothers with daughters. Fathers with sons. The press tried to make him a hero. He refused interviews. He refused awards. When journalists asked about his motivation, he gave them nothing. Because how do you explain that redemption isn't something you claim? It's something you suffer? He never remarried. He had no children. Just long nights, and the echo of a melody that lived in the walls of his memory. Some say he became a saint of the forgotten. Others say he went mad. Both might be true. One winter, he was found sitting outside a closed-down shelter, holding the hand of an old woman who had died in the cold. No one recognized her. No one had come for her. But he stayed with her until the coroner arrived. That image went viral. Him in his tailored coat weeping like a boy beside a stranger. But for him, she wasn't a stranger. She was every mother, every silence, every mistake. And as snow fell around them, He whispered that same lullaby, the one he never got to finish singing. It was the only thing he had left. Years passed, seasons blurred. His face aged faster than his body. Lines formed beneath his eyes, not from time, but from sorrow. He stopped attending the board meetings of his companies, now run by people he didn't know or care to. He became a shadow of the man once praised in Forbes covers. But he didn't vanish. No, he transformed into something else entirely. A witness. A man who moved through the world with the quiet desperation of one who had seen the edge of forgiveness and tasted the poison of regret. He kept a journal now. Dozens of them. Leather-bound, handwritten. Not for anyone else. Only for her. He wrote letters he would never send. Descriptions of people he helped. Stories of the elderly he saved. His thoughts, fragmented and raw. Sometimes he would ask her questions. Did you think of me in those winters? Did you ever hate me? Was there a moment you gave up hope? The pages always ended the same way. I'm sorry, Mama. And every time he wrote it, it bled from his soul like a wound that would never close. In those letters, he wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't a figure of power. He was just a son who arrived too late. The silence in his mansion grew thicker. Dust covered the hallways. The garden withered. And still, every week, he visited the same bench in that nursing home, the one where she had smiled. He sat there for hours, sometimes in the rain, sometimes in the sun, just sat. Because sometimes silence is the only apology we can give. They say some people die twice, once when their body fails, and once when their name is spoken for the last time. But he was different. His name had not vanished. It had transformed. Matteo was no longer just a man. He had become a wound carved into the silence of 1,000 lives. And in death, he became what he had failed to be in life, a listener of forgotten voices. After his body was found, still and silent on that bench, no one rushed to make a statement. There was no press conference, no billionaire obituary, with golden frames. Just a single sentence issued by the Silent Soul Foundation. He left the way he arrived, in silence, carrying a song that no one else could hear. And yet the world kept moving. But not that place. That bench, the one in the courtyard of the old care home, became something else. It was not grand. It was not clean. The paint had peeled. The wood creaked under the weight of time and sorrow. And yet people came. Not tourists, not fans, just people. Strangers who had heard pieces of the story. Some came with guilt, others with questions. Some sat there for hours, waiting for answers that would never arrive. Over time, it became known as the bench of the lost son. Old women came to sit and hum. Fathers came to weep for sons who stopped calling. Daughters came to forgive mothers who never hugged them right. And each time the wind moved through the leaves, there was a whisper. Not a voice, but something deeper. A memory. A warning. No plaque was ever installed. No marble. No statue. Only the flowers. Always just one. A single red rose. Left once. A week. No one ever saw who placed it. Some believed it was a former nurse. Others, a reclusive nun who had once worked with Matteo in his early visits. But deep down, most believed something else. Something they couldn't say aloud. That perhaps it was her, his mother, not in body but in essence, that somehow the love she held, buried under years of silence and suffering, remained behind. That maybe, in that final smile she gave him, something had been passed on, something eternal. In the years that followed, Matteo's journals were discovered, dozens of them, all in his own hand. Some were mere fragments, others full letters, poetic, desperate, furious, tender. Each one addressed to her, some dated, some not. The ink often blurred by what seemed like tears. Scholars tried to publish them. Biographers begged for access. The foundation refused. They issued a simple statement. Some apologies are not meant to be read. They are meant to be felt. But one passage was shared with the world, a single page that lay beside his body on the morning he died. I was born twice, once by your hands, and once by your absence. The first time I was a child. Second, I was a man made of regret. I could never return what you gave. I could only carry it broken. Forgive me for all the times I thought silence meant peace. I know now. Silence is where love goes to die when no one speaks its name. After that, the page was framed in a room at the Silent Soul Central office. Not as inspiration, but as warning. A reminder that redemption isn't glory. It's grief that learns to walk upright. There were moments late at night when volunteers claimed to feel his presence. Not like a ghost, not like a haunting, but like warmth in a cold room. Like a hand on a shoulder when no one was near. One caretaker, alone during a storm, swore she heard humming in the hallway. That same old tune, even though the radio was off and the patients were asleep. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Because when you carry pain that deep, it doesn't vanish, it transforms. Some said Mateo's soul had never left, that he remained not in stone or in photo, but in every whispered "I'm sorry" that never got a reply. That in every nursing home where someone sits alone, he is there, kneeling beside them, placing a rose, and waiting. Waiting for someone to remember. Waiting for someone to speak. Waiting to be forgiven again. The wind did not stop blowing after Mateo's death. It traveled, quietly, invisibly, across oceans, through alleyways, over concrete jungles and barren fields. His story, or rather, the ache that came with it, slipped into conversations, into classrooms, into households where silence had reigned for too long. In the months following his passing, a curious phenomenon began to unfold. The Silent Soul Foundation, once a relatively discreet operation of social workers and case managers, suddenly found itself flooded with messages. Thousands per day, emails, letters, voicemails filled with trembling voices. They came from everywhere: Argentina, South Korea, Nigeria, Portugal, Canada. From children who had run away, from parents who had been abandoned, from nurses, from janitors, from those who worked in places society forgot, those homes with peeling walls and fluorescent lights that flicker in the night. The name Mateo began to mean something new. Not wealth, not pity, but recognition. People didn't just hear his story, they felt it in their bones. Because his regret was a mirror, and everyone who looked into it saw a version of themselves staring back. The foundation expanded at a speed no one anticipated. Donations poured in, not from corporations, but from individuals. From a woman who had reconnected with her estranged mother after a decade of silence. From a man who finally forgave his father on his deathbed. From a teenager who realized the anger he held toward his grandparents had nothing to do with them, and everything to do with his own fear of being forgotten. Silent Soul grew, not like a business, but like a tree whose roots found water in buried wounds. By the third year, there were over 100 branches in 30 different countries, each one focused not on saving, but on listening. They trained staff not to speak over the elderly, but to ask questions like, "What was your favorite meal as a child?" Or, "Who was the first person you ever missed?" These were not interviews, they were retrievals of memory, of identity, of dignity. A separate program was created, the Echo Registry. It was simple. Every missing elder, every unnamed resident, every undocumented soul would be logged with as much detail as possible. A name, a drawing, a song they hummed, even a smell they remembered. The idea was, even if their blood family never came, someone, somewhere, might recognize something. The registry was public, and the matches came slowly, then in waves. Woman in Peru saw a sketch of a man who used to talk about fishing in a river, with red rocks and screaming frogs. She cried. It was her uncle. He'd been gone since 1987. In Ukraine, a photo was recognized by a nurse who remembered a patient from a refugee camp in the 90s. It was her mother. A man in France identified his father based on a single quote written in the registry. "Don't trust anyone who smiles before 9 a.m." It was a family saying. None of these would have happened without Mateo, but no one at the foundation ever said his name aloud. It became a rule, an unspoken vow. Because Mateo didn't want reverence, he wanted resolution, and yet, his presence lingered. Documentaries were made, though most were blocked from entering his home or accessing his journals. The foundation guarded them like sacred texts. They allowed only one film crew access, under the condition that the project would not center on Mateo's wealth or downfall, but on the silence he left behind. The resulting documentary, After the Last Song, was unlike any other. It opened not with his image, but with footage of elderly residents sitting in silence, their eyes fixed on doors that would never open. Then it faded into a voice. Not a narrator, but Mateo's own words recorded secretly during one of his later visits. "I keep thinking about time, how arrogant I was to believe it would wait for me, that I could delay my apology until I was ready, but time doesn't wait, it forgets, and so do people." That quote became etched into walls, into social work programs, into the hearts of those who had waited too long. But for every reunion made, there were still those who never came. Some elders died without names. Some children never returned. Some silences could not be bridged. And this was the cruel truth at the core of Silent Soul, that redemption is beautiful, but never complete. One of the lead coordinators wrote in her journal, "We don't fix families. We hold the pieces when no one else will." Still, even holding those pieces brought change. In several countries, new policies were introduced to combat elder neglect. ID systems were updated. Retirement homes were given surprise inspections, and more importantly, a conversation began. One not centered on pity or charity, but on human worth. In schools, teenagers were assigned essays asking, "What is something you wish your parents knew you felt but never told them?" In prisons, inmates wrote letters to family members they had lost touch with. In government offices, clerks volunteered to spend weekends reading echo registry entries, hoping to find someone they knew. Mateo's name was not on any of these initiatives, but he was everywhere, in silence. And among all the stories of change, one stood out. A boy, only 12, watched the documentary late one night, alone in his room. His father had left years ago. His mother worked double shifts. He barely spoke to either. But something in that final image, Mateo alone on the bench, struck him. The next morning, the boy walked 6 blocks to a retirement home near his school and asked to volunteer. They gave him a mop. He returned the next day, and the next. 2 years later, he began a program called Kids Without Grandparents, a mentorship where students visited elders with no family. It spread across cities, across countries. He never mentioned Mateo once. He didn't have to. It was a Tuesday, cold, overcast, the kind of day where the sky forgets to shine and the ground forgets to welcome your steps. A young volunteer named Camilla walked through the gates of a nursing home on the edge of the city. It wasn't one of the polished public-facing centers that got all the attention. This one was different. It had no marketing, no tours. It was where the system sent those it didn't know what to do with. Camilla was only 22. Her shift was supposed to be simple: serve lunch, read aloud to anyone who asked, report any urgent needs to the supervisor. But that day, her feet stopped in front of a corner room, quiet, closed, and without a name on the door. Inside, she found a man, old, thin, hair the color of steel wool. His hands trembled even when still. He sat by the window with a pencil and a torn piece of paper, sketching again and again. Always the same face. A woman. She had kind eyes, wrinkles of laughter, a mouth frozen in a gentle smile. Camilla knocked softly. The man looked up, blinking, as if woken from a dream. "Hello," she whispered. "I'm Camilla. May I sit with you?" He nodded slowly. Then, after a long pause, his voice rasped like dry leaves. "I don't know who she is, but I think she used to love me." Camilla's breath caught. She looked at the drawing again. It was rough but clear, familiar somehow. "What's your name?" she asked gently. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know. He had no records, no relatives, no past. Only fragments, dreams, faces, music that slipped through his lips like ghosts. And that one name, scribbled in the corner of each page, Mateo. It didn't make sense. He wasn't the Mateo. That man was long gone, years buried, legend now. But the name hung there like a shadow, like a whisper returned. Camilla felt something shift in her chest. She began to visit him daily. She brought clean paper, sharpened pencils, soft music. She started asking questions, not because she expected answers, but because she knew sometimes the right question could call a soul back to life. One day, she hummed a melody without thinking. An old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. The man froze. His eyes widened, and for the first time he smiled. Not out of joy, but recognition. Tears welled up in his eyes as he mouthed the final notes of the song. Not perfect, not full, but real. And for a moment, Camilla swore she saw a boy in that man's face. A boy looking for something he lost long ago. That night, she went home and searched. Not for his records, there were none, but for stories. She reread every Silent Soul entry, every article, every rumor, every line of After the Last Song. The original Mateo's journals had never been released in full, but scholars had published fragments, lines that seemed like riddles, but were really blueprints of pain. One line stayed with her. "Sometimes I wonder if pain can echo forward, if it can skip generations until someone kind enough stops to listen." Was this what he meant? Was this man in the room someone touched by that echo? Or was he just another forgotten soul, shaping memory into myth as a way to survive? Either way, Camilla stayed. Over months, the man began speaking more, sharing flashes, a bridge over a river, a dog named Luna, a woman with warm hands and a voice like honey. He couldn't place the details, but the emotions, those he remembered. When he laughed, it was soft. When he cried, it was quieter still. Camilla documented everything. Eventually, she added him to the echo registry, even though she doubted a match would come. But something strange happened. A woman from a distant city, nearly 900 kilometers away, submitted a sketch to the registry. She had drawn it from memory. Her grandfather, gone for nearly 20 years. He had suffered a breakdown, left home, was never found. Her sketch matched his face, not perfectly, but close enough to stir questions. She came, not with hope, but with curiosity. When the man saw her, he froze again. This time, not in confusion, but in awe. He touched her face like someone waking from a dream. She held his hands and whispered, "Do you remember me?" He shook his head, then whispered, "But I think I was supposed to." They wept together, not because they were certain of anything, but because the silence between them had been broken. That was enough. He moved in with her family weeks later, and though his memories never fully returned, a new life began. Not as a father, but as a man with a second chance. Camilla returned to the bench, the one at the old home. She sat there with her journal and wrote it all down. And when she stood to leave, she placed a single red rose on the wood. Someone, years ago, had started the ritual. Now she continued it. She didn't know who that original Mateo had really been, but she knew what he had left behind. Not just sorrow, but permission. Permission to forgive. Permission to return. Permission to remember. even if remembering hurt. That day, as the sun set, Camilla whispered to the wind, "Your name still matters, even if we don't know who you were." And the wind, always faithful, carried it across the city, through streets, over hospitals, into lonely apartments, and back again to the old care homes, where new names waited to be spoken. Because forgetting is a choice, and sometimes, so is love.